Adventure, fun, and fantasy are waiting on the shelf. A story's so much better with a friend than by yourself. The cover picture is a doorway to another land. So gather round and let the story take us by the hand. We're telling tales with friends, and we've got plans for you. GaaGaa's playing Goldilocks, this bear is peekaboo. Here's Tillie, Larry, and our Harry, great to have you all. Stories are for everyone, the young, old, big, and small. Tales and Friends, Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack and his sister are played by the Puzzle Kid. The friends are played by the Color Crew. Many years ago, in a village far, far away, there was a little farm. And on that little farm, in that little village, lived a boy named Jack with his little sister. But the village was in trouble. It hadn't rained in so long that they couldn't grow any food to eat, and they were hungry. One day, they heard a sound coming from above. They looked up and saw a giant pea falling from the sky. They dove out of the way just as the pea landed in the front yard. Jack's sister, Jenny, grabbed a knife and fork and ran over to the pea. "Finally, we have food! Let's eat!" she yelled. But Jack stopped her. "Instead of eating the pea, why don't we plant it and grow more peas?" he said. "But I'm hungry now," Jenny said, stomping her feet. "I am too," said Jack. "But if we put in a little work and patience, something may grow from this pea and we might be rewarded with even more peas." Jenny hesitated at first, but then agreed to put down her knife and fork. She helped Jack take the pea into his room and plant it. They poured what little water they had into the planter and waited. And waited. And waited. Nothing happened for days. When suddenly a little green leaf peeked out from the ground. And the next day it peeked out a little more. Then, on the third day, the ground started to shake. And then the house started to shake. Then everything started to shake. The little leaf in the planter grew into a beanstalk. But the beanstalk didn't stop growing. It grew as high as Jack, and then as high as the ceiling. And then it broke through the ceiling and stretched up into the sky. Jack and Jenny jumped around the beanstalk excited. "You were right," Jenny exclaimed. "Something did grow out of the giant pea. But I wonder what it is, and where are all the other peas?" "You're right," Jack said. "Maybe we need to work a little more and have some more patience to get to the food." "But how?" Jenny asked. Her tummy was rumbling. "Let's see what's at the top of the beanstalk," Jack said as he started climbing. Jenny followed her brother, and they climbed up the beanstalk, through the roof, and through the clouds. When they reached the top, they couldn't believe what they saw. "Jack," Jenny exclaimed, "you were right. There is more food up here." They looked out over fields filled with the biggest and brightest fruits and vegetables they'd ever seen. Bananas as big as boats. Tomatoes the size of carriages. Carrots as tall as towers. "We can feed our whole village with one of these apples," Jack said. Jack and Jenny rolled up their sleeves and got to work. They worked hard for a whole day, bringing food down from the beanstalk. By the time they were done, they had filled their family's farm with enough food to feed their village, and the village down the road, and the village next to that one. People came from miles around to fill their carts with food to fill their bellies. The next week, Jack and Jenny sat down with some friends for a feast of potatoes as big as boulders and celery the size of ships. How did you know the bean would grow into a huge stalk that would give us all this food? The friends asked. We didn't, Jenny said, but Jack said if we worked hard with some patience, then we would be rewarded. Jack was glad his sister learned a lesson and gave her a big hug. Now, who wants another potato? Jack asked as he held the vegetable high over his head with 2 hands. The end. Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood is played by Giggs. The mother is played by Al. The granny is played by Eve. The wolf is played by Hugg. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in the woods. She loved to explore the woods wearing her big red hood, so everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood, or Red for short. One day, she wanted to visit her granny on the other side of the woods. Her mother helped her pack a picnic basket full of delicious food to bring along. Once everything was packed, her mother gave her a kiss and said, "Don't let the food get cold. Go straight to Granny's house." "I will," said Red as she kissed her mom and skipped off into the forest. As she ran through the woods, the smell of the food in the basket attracted many furry friends. First, a fluffy squirrel scurried up and gave the basket a sniff. "I would sure love a bite of that apple pie," the squirrel said, rubbing his belly. "And I would love to give you a bite," Red smiled, "but this is for my granny, and it's getting cold, so I have to be going." The squirrel understood and waved as Red went on her way. Then a little blue jay flew down from a tree. "Something smells delicious," she chirped. "I would love a bite of that bread." "Sorry, this is for my granny," Red smiled, "and it's getting cold, so I have to be going." The blue jay understood and waved as Red went on her way. Then another animal crept out of the woods. It was a big wolf with big ears, big eyes, and big white teeth. The wolf seemed a bit scary to Red. "What delicious food you have," the wolf growled. "I would love a bite of everything." Red didn't like the wolf, but she was still polite. "I would love to give you a bite," Red said, "but this is for my granny, and it's getting cold, so I have to be going." And with that, she left the wolf in the woods and continued to her granny's. But the wolf was really hungry and wanted that food, so he ran to Granny's house as fast as he could. When he got there, he saw that Granny was down by the stream washing her clothes. So he had an idea. He would sneak into the house, dress up like her, and trick Red into giving him the food. As the wolf got into Granny's bed, wearing her nightgown and cap, Red opened the front door. "Granny," she yelled, "I'm here with lunch." The wolf, disguised his gruffy growl with a high voice, shouted, "Hi, dear, why don't you bring the food here?" Red ran into Granny's room. She looked at her granny, but something didn't seem right. "Why do you have such big ears?" she asked. "Oh, these," said the wolf, trying to sound like Granny. "The better to hear you with, my dear." Red wasn't convinced and stepped closer. "And why do you have such big eyes, Granny?" "The better to see you with, my dear," the wolf said impatiently. But Red still wasn't sure, so she stepped even closer. "And why do you have such big teeth?" "The better to eat that delicious food," the wolf answered as he jumped from the bed, trying to grab the basket. "You're not my granny," Red yelled. "You're the big bad wolf from the woods." Just then, Granny came into the room. "Is that you, Big Bad Wolf?" The wolf jumped out of bed with his tail between his legs. "Yes," he said. "I'm sorry for lying, but I was just so hungry." "Well," Granny said, "I don't like lies. Not from people and especially not from big bad wolves. But if you are truly sorry, you can have lunch with us." "I'm sorry," said the wolf and promised to never lie again. Granny celebrated by inviting everyone in the woods to enjoy a delicious picnic. The end. The Pied Piper of Hemet. The Pied Piper is played by Hugg. The birds played by the Color Crew. Once upon a time, in a valley between two mountains, stood the town of Hemet. Every spring, all the birds in the land would fly over Hemet as they moved from one mountain to the other. It was a magnificent sight to see. One bird would fly in front and sing the most beautiful bird songs. All the other birds would listen to the music, and that way they'd know which way to go to get to the other mountain. But one year, the singing bird had a sore throat. She couldn't make the beautiful music she usually made. Oh no! Without the singing bird's music, all the other birds got lost. They didn't know which way to go. They flew in circles, and when they got tired, they landed in Hemet. There were birds everywhere. There were birds in the trees, and on the houses, and even on people's heads. The people of Hemet knew that they had to help the birds find their way to the mountain. But how? "I have an idea," said a little boy named Piper. "The birds are lost because the singing bird, who usually leads them with her music, has a sore throat. If we could make the same sounds as the singing bird, we could lead the birds up to the mountain." "That's a great idea," cheered the people of Hemet. So Piper got to work trying to pick an instrument that sounded like the beautiful bird song. First, Piper picked a drum. He took it over to the birds and began playing. Bang, bang, bang. He started marching toward the mountain. But the birds didn't follow him. Why not? "Ah," said Piper, "this drum does not sound like the beautiful bird song. I need to try another instrument." Next, Piper picked up a guitar. He took it over to the birds and began playing strum, strum, strum. He started marching toward the mountain, but the birds didn't follow him. Why not? "Ah," said Piper, "this guitar does not sound like the beautiful bird song." Next, Piper picked up cymbals. He took them over to the birds and began playing. Crash, crash, crash. He started marching toward the mountain, but the birds still didn't follow him. Why not? "Ah," said Piper, "these cymbals do not sound like the beautiful bird song." Finally, Piper picked up a flute. He took the flute over to the birds and began playing. He started marching toward the mountain, and this time, the birds started following him. The flute sounded just like the beautiful bird song. Hooray! Piper started blowing his flute louder and louder until all the birds could hear him. Soon, they all started following him. Piper marched, and behind him flew the birds all the way through Hamelin and all the way up the mountain. When they got to the top, all the birds gathered round Piper to thank him for his help. Piper was so proud that he had helped the birds find their way to the mountain. The birds, Piper, and all the people of Hamelin lived happily ever after. The end. Adventure, fun, and fantasy are waiting on the shelf. A story's so much better with a friend than by yourself. The cover picture is a doorway to another land. So gather round and let the story take us by the hand. We're telling tales with friends, and we've got plans for you. GaaGaa's playing Goldilocks, this bear is peekaboo. Here's Tillie, Larry, and our Harry, great to have you all. Stories are for everyone, the young, old, big, and small. Tales and Friends. Beauty and the Beast. The Prince and Beast is played by Peekaboo. Beauty is played by Giggs. The Forest Fairy is played by Tillie. The servants are played by the Color Crew. Once upon a time, there was a prince who wasn't nice. He was rude to everyone. He wasn't nice to people, his puppy, and even his pet parrot. One day, when he was riding his horse, he came upon an old lady with a broken cart. The wheel had fallen off, and she needed help fixing it. "Would you be kind enough to help me with my wagon?" the old lady asked. "I don't have time for your broken wheel," the prince said. "But how will I bring this food to the needy children?" she cried. "I don't have time for needy children either," the prince shouted. Just then, the old lady got mad. She took out her wand and held it in the air. "I am a forest fairy," she roared. "And because you are so mean, I will teach you a lesson and turn you into a wild beast." She pointed the wand at the prince and, in a flash, transformed him into a big, hairy beast. "I will release this spell if you can be nice to someone," the fairy said before flying off. The prince, who was a beast now, ran back to his castle to find it was enchanted as well, and his servants had also been put under the spell. His butler became an old clock. His cook was now a pot. And his maid was a feather duster. Now, the beast became even meaner than before. But his servants, who knew that only if the prince becomes nice they could reverse the spell, tried to help him anyway. One day, there was a knock at the door. It was a beautiful, poor girl named Beauty. She was asking for a job as a maid. "Go away," the beast roared and hurried away. As he ran, he stubbed his big toe on a stool. "Ouchie! Ouchie!" he cried, hopping around on one foot. Beauty ran inside to look at the beast's toe. "You need some ice for this," she said as she ran into the kitchen. She soon returned with a pack of ice and wrapped it around his toe. "Why are you kind to me?" the beast grumbled. Beauty just looked at him and smiled. I think you should always help people in need, even if they're mean, she said.
Not me, the beast roared. I don't help anyone. Leave here at once.
The girl finished wrapping his toe, said goodbye, and walked back into the cold woods. Soon after she left the house, the beast started feeling bad for being so mean. He asked the old clock how he could be nicer. Go and find the girl and bring her back to the castle, the old clock said. It's cold outside. The beast decided to do just that.
I will help Beauty,
the beast roared before hopping on his horse and riding into the cold, dark woods to look for her. He found her shivering under a big tree. He jumped down, wrapped her in a blanket, and took her back to the castle. When they returned, the beast and his servants put her in front of the fire and gave her a hot cup of cocoa. Why did you come to get me? Beauty asked. The beast smiled and said, I felt bad for being mean to you and I wanted to help you. I hope you can forgive. Beauty gave him a big hug and he hugged her back. Just then, the forest fairy flew into the window with her wand. Finally, she shouted, you have proved that you can be kind and now I will lift the spell. She waved her wand and transformed the beast back into a prince, and the servants back into humans. I have learned my lesson, the prince exclaimed. I will never be mean again. Everyone jumped for joy and lived happily ever after. The end. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Goldilocks is played by GaaGaa. And the Three Bears are played by Peekaboo. One day, Goldilocks was walking through the forest when her tummy started rumbling. She was incredibly hungry. Luckily, the wind blew a breeze that smelled just like delicious cinnamon swirl oatmeal. So she followed the smell through the woods until she came upon a campground. On the campground was a picnic blanket with 3 hot plates of cinnamon swirl oatmeal, 3 chairs, and 3 comfy hammocks. But there weren't any people. Goldilocks looked around and shouted, "Hello, is anyone here?" But the only response she heard was the rumbling of her hungry tummy. So she walked to the picnic blanket and stood over the 3 bowls of oatmeal. She wanted to eat, but felt bad because the oatmeal belonged to someone else. So she shouted, "Since no one is here and the oatmeal is getting cold, I hope it's okay if I have some." But again, the only response was her rumbling tummy, so she decided it was okay. There was a large bowl, a medium-sized bowl, and a small bowl. She took bites from the large bowl, the medium-sized bowl, and the small bowl. Then she decided that the small bowl was just right for her. This way, if people came back, she would have eaten the smallest amount of oatmeal, leaving more for them. Now that her tummy no longer rumbled, Goldilocks started walking back down the path, but stopped when her feet began to hurt. Noticing the 3 chairs, she decided to rest her feet for a few minutes. There was a big chair, a medium-sized chair, and a small chair. She decided to sit just for a minute. The big chair was too big for her. Even the medium-sized chair was too big. The small chair was just right. After sitting for a bit, Goldilocks' feet felt better, but now she was tired. So she decided to take a nap before leaving. She looked around for a place to sleep and saw the 3 hammocks. There was a big one, a medium-sized one, and a small one. Again, she wanted to make sure it was okay. "I'm going to take a nap in one of these hammocks. Is that okay?" When no one replied, she climbed into the big hammock, but it was too big for her. Even the medium-sized hammock was too big. Finally, she climbed into the small hammock, and it was just right. Goldilocks fell asleep. While she was sleeping, 3 bears came to the campground. There was a big bear, a medium-sized bear, and a small bear. They walked up to the picnic blanket and saw the bowls of oatmeal.
Look, someone tasted my oatmeal,
said the big bear. "And someone tasted my oatmeal too," said the medium-sized bear. "And someone tasted my oatmeal and ate it all up," said the little bear. Then the bears walked over to the chairs.
"Look, someone was sitting in all our chairs,"
said the big bear. Just then, the bears heard snoring. They walked over to the hammocks and looked at each other.
"I think someone was sleeping in my hammock,"
said the big bear. "And someone was sleeping in my hammock too," said the medium-sized bear. "And look, someone is sleeping in my hammock," roared the little bear. The roar woke Goldilocks up. She jumped out of the hammock and ran away. But after a few steps, she looked back and saw the 3 bears smiling at her. They looked like nice bears. So she walked back. The bears listened as Goldilocks told them how she was walking down the path when she got hungry and tired and she needed to stop and eat and rest. "I hope you understand and forgive me," she said. After hearing this, each of the bears gave Goldilocks a big hug and told her it was okay and that she was welcome to visit any time she wanted. Goldilocks thanked the bears for their kindness and went on her way back down the path with a full belly and rested feet. The end. Pinocchio. Pinocchio is played by Harry the Bunny. Geppetto is played by Hugg. The fairy is played by Giggs. Once upon a time, there was a wondrous old woodworker named Geppetto who didn't have any children. But he wanted one so badly that he took a freshly cut piece of wood and carved a puppet that looked just like a boy. That night, he went to sleep and dreamt that his puppet would turn into a real boy and be his son. As he slept, a friendly fairy fluttered by and decided to help Geppetto. She flew over the puppet and sprinkled magic powder over its head. The next morning, while Geppetto was making breakfast, the wooden puppet began to talk. Geppetto couldn't believe it. Then the puppet began to move. It even started dancing. Geppetto was so happy that even though the puppet was made out of wood, he decided to treat him like a real boy. He named him Pinocchio and sent him to school to learn to read and write. But before Pinocchio left, Geppetto warned him to be careful. He must go right to school and then come right back home. Pinocchio smiled, said okay, and happily hopped off to school, leaving Geppetto waving at the door. On his way to school, Pinocchio saw a group of children having fun on the playground. He remembered what Geppetto had told him, go right to school and then come right home. But the kids were laughing and playing and having so much fun that Pinocchio decided to join them for just a minute. This was the first time Pinocchio ever played, and he loved it. In fact, Pinocchio was having so much fun playing that he forgot all about school. Just then, he heard a bell ring. It was school letting out. He had promised Geppetto that he'd go to school. What was he going to do? When Pinocchio got home, Geppetto was very happy to see him and asked him how his first day at school went. Pinocchio was too embarrassed, so he lied and said that it went great. Right at that moment, Pinocchio's nose grew longer. But Geppetto was so excited that he didn't notice that Pinocchio's nose was growing. Instead, he ran off to his workshop to make Pinocchio a brand new wooden pencil box to take to school the next day.
Do you like your teacher?
Geppetto asked as he started working. Yes, I do, said Pinocchio, lying again. And just like before, his nose grew even more. Pinocchio didn't understand what was happening. Could his nose be growing because he was lying? He went to the mirror, and when he saw his long nose, he started to cry. Geppetto heard the crying and came immediately.
What happened?
He asked. Something is wrong with my nose, sobbed Pinocchio. Geppetto looked closer and saw Pinocchio's long nose.
Don't worry, said Geppetto and hugged Pinocchio. I will help you and everything will be all right.
Pinocchio saw how much his father cared for him and was ashamed that he didn't tell him the truth. In a quiet voice, Pinocchio admitted that he was lying and didn't go to school. As he told the truth, his nose got smaller and smaller until it was back to its original size. Geppetto wiped the tears from Pinocchio's cheeks and thanked him for telling the truth. A sparkling ray of light came through the window, and the fairy appeared. She said that because Pinocchio decided to tell the truth, he had earned the right to become a real boy. The fairy waved her wand, and in a burst of magical dust, transformed Pinocchio into a real, live boy. Pinocchio looked down at his arms and legs and saw they were no longer wood. Geppetto couldn't believe his eyes. He finally had a real boy for a son. Geppetto jumped to his feet, and together with Pinocchio, they started dancing and singing. Even the fairy joined in. From that day on, Pinocchio always told the truth, and he and Geppetto lived happily ever after. The end.
First, it was awesome. Now it's truly amazing. First app gets you instant access to the beloved BabyFirst TV channel, now with an upgraded experience. Wherever you go and anytime you want, offering a wide range of original videos, games, songs, books, and more, making for hours of educational, high-quality entertainment accessible from any device with our all-inclusive subscription. Search the app stores for BF100 to download First today and unlock a world of educational fun for your child.
Adventure, fun, and fantasy are waiting on the shelf. A story's so much better with a friend than by yourself. The cover picture is a doorway to another land. So gather round and let the story take us by the hand. We're telling tales with friends, and we've got plans for you. GaaGaa's playing Goldilocks, this bear is peekaboo. Here's Tillie, Larry, and our Harry, great to have you all. Stories are for everyone, the young, old, big, and small. Tales and Friends. The Ugly Duckling. The Ugly Duckling is played by Larry. The ducklings are played by the color crew. Mommy Duck is played by Tillie. Once upon a time, there was a family of ducks that lived in a wonderful water fountain. There was a mommy and her kids, Donnie, Deborah, Dana, and Denny. They all had beautiful, fluffy yellow feathers, shiny beaks, and their quacks sounded like lovely music. Every Sunday, families would come and visit the fountain, feed the ducks, and watch their tricks. The best trick was Donnie's diving duck routine. It was a very special trick. Donnie would toss a ball into the fountain, dive under the water, and bring it back up in his beak. Everyone loved it. One day, the mommy duck had an announcement. There was going to be a new duckling joining their happy family. She pointed to the egg sitting in the nest. Soon, the egg would hatch and the duck family would have a new duckling. The ducks couldn't wait. They were so excited to see their duckling sister or brother. They waited and waited until one day, the egg finally started to crack. The duck family gathered around and got ready to clap for their beautiful new duckling. But they didn't clap. This duckling was so different. He didn't have soft yellow feathers or a shiny beak like they did, and he wasn't as gentle as they were. Instead, he was red all over, with a huge beak the size of his head. And his quacking was more like a loud honk. Oh no, they didn't know what to do. The mommy duck went over to quack hello to her little baby. She didn't care if the duckling looked different. She loved him anyway and named him Dave. But Donnie, Deborah, Dana, and Denny weren't so nice. They didn't like their new brother because he was so different. They didn't call him Dave. They called him the Ugly Duckling. They laughed at his loud honk, and they wouldn't teach him any of their tricks, especially the most famous trick of them all, Donnie's diving duck routine. One day, when the families came to the fountain, Donnie was going to perform his spectacular routine. Donnie stood at the top of the fountain and threw the ball down towards the water. But the ball didn't hit the water. It landed on the ground and bounced away. Donnie flew after it, trying to catch it in his beak. But the ball kept bouncing and landed right under a big, heavy stone. Donnie tried with all his might to move the stone, but it was too heavy for him. As he struggled to free the ball, the crowd was waiting for him to return with the ball in his beak, but Donnie didn't come back. He was too embarrassed. Oh no, Donnie couldn't do his trick. Just then, the Ugly Duckling came running out and said he could help Donnie get the ball from under the stone. Donnie wasn't sure how he could help, but he wanted the ball back and stepped aside so the Ugly Duckling could try. The Ugly Duckling flew as fast as he could to the rock. He lowered his shoulder and pushed until he finally shoved the heavy stone off the ball. Donnie picked up the ball with his beak and returned to the fountain. The crowd let out a big cheer. After everyone stopped clapping, Donnie thanked his new brother for saving the show. He even gave him a big hug. Just then, the rest of the ducklings came over and lifted him up on their shoulders. They paraded him around the fountain. Suddenly, he didn't feel sad or ugly anymore. He started quacking his special quack and waving his feathers. He felt happy because everyone appreciated him, not for how he looked, but for who he was. That night, the ducks apologized and said, "We're very sorry we were mean to you. Will you forgive us? We promise never to call you the Ugly Duckling again. Instead, we will call you Dave Duck." "That sounds great," Dave Duck said as he splashed his feathers in the fountain. He felt special and loved, and they all lived happily ever after. The end.
Baby First! Click the subscribe button below.